staff who meet and greet the public almost every day of the week. It is imperative as we move through this process, and again, as Jeff has led this committee, that we tend to look at customer service as a way to move forward. We can still enforce rules, we can still let people, let the community know what the rules are, but you can do it in a way that's appropriate. That's a big piece of the change that we see. We've done things like we've modified staff who may be in trouble for whatever reason, they get assigned to visitation. That's wasn't a good decision before, not a good idea now. Having the right staff selected for these jobs, we know will get better. That is part of the program that Jeff's leading. We agree.
Okay, so what you're saying is that, and there was a third part to that, I'm sorry, Pastor Mutu, there was a third part to that, and that is with those that are, the officers that are taking care of those that are in confinement
Yes.
and detention centers. Why don't you follow up on that piece, and then I'll make my comment.
We're very concerned, and again, some of the same phrasing that we use, you're bringing back customer service. There's a difference between an officer having to be a corrections officer with an inmate and be a customer service representative with a visitor. One of our concerns was how does, on a humanistic level, an officer who may be downstairs in your solitary confinement unit, who has to deal with the worst of the worst, and who has to be charged up in order to make sure that they can contain the situation. They have to be on guard. They have to use all of those aggressive training points in order to maintain order and keep their own safety. How do we take that officer and mid-shift send him over to visitation? And now those same tactical pieces are being used to greet the grandmother who's coming to see her grandson. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that those two will not compute with one another. And so having the specific person trained for corrections and specific officers trained for customer service-based visitation, we think is a piece that would really help to mitigate some of that peaceful transition.
So where we've seen reasonably good success, we've been very careful about the selection of the staff who work in these particular areas, especially with adolescent inmates. Those staff were interviewed and selected to work with young offenders. We're taking that same process, working with female inmates, working with mentally ill inmates, and very successful, because you're absolutely right. You want to make sure the staff, while they're trained in general, really that their personality fits the role that we're putting them into. So part of our success has been exactly that, picking the right staff to work in these areas that have the right temperament, the right personality, who can enforce the rules, but do it in a way that's appropriate. So we agree.
One of the things that we spoke with the commissioner early on in our initial meetings was that the large majority of people who are on Rikers Island are people who have not been convicted of a crime. These are folks who simply been accused of committing a crime and are waiting their day in court. In that context, then, they should be dealt with in that manner. Not to say that folks who have been convicted shouldn't be dealt with any less respect or dignity, but we have to really begin to start transforming the mindset and the understanding of who this population is, because somehow they get portrayed in the wrong light as if they are deserving to be treated less than. So all of this is part of the reform process, and it's going to take some time. Remember, this culture didn't emerge overnight. It's going to take quite a while, for us to begin to change that culture, and it's going to really require the community to really step up and be involved, which is why the task force has been heavily involved in attempting to try to provide as much insight in this process as possible, not only to corrections, but also to the NYPD. On that note, we're developing right now curriculum specifically for the NYPD, and we're hoping that the success of this training with the NYPD will allow us to also extend that to corrections as well, and we'll be offering that to the commissioner as well.
Sorry about that.
So the commissioner has about 6 more minutes with us. We want to make it work our while. Reverend Q, would we like to take another question?
Yes, there were some questions the audience had, and I want to be sensitive to that. Dr. Ray Rivera.
Pastor Clyde will get you next.
My name is Reverend Raymond Rivera. I'm part of the board of the task force. I'm also president of the Latino Pastoral Action Center, and I concur with many of the issues that have been raised today and certainly support them. Thank you for coming, but I have something specific that I've been delegated by some of the groups that are part of our network, and those are the chaplaincy groups. United Chaplains, Latin American Chaplains, New York State Chaplain Task Force, and I don't know who's in charge now under your administration of clergy-related programs, but under the previous administration, there was a clergy volunteer program, a faith volunteer program that was, in our opinion, functioning very well, that where clergy and lay leaders, faith leaders, were allowed to come into the prisons, and they actually didn't visit the prisoners in the visiting room, but booths were provided to them like lawyers when they visit their client. That program was suspended. I don't know if it's been reinstated. I want to advocate for it to be reinstated again for two reasons. Pastors and clergy deal with institutions at two levels like yours. One is personal care, and the other is speaking truth to power, like we're doing here, trying to impact policy. But the personal aspect is also very important to us, and the majority of people that visit prisons in the religious context, and we say this humbly, are people of color. Those are the thousands and thousands of volunteers that visit prisons continuously. And somewhere in the transition, something got lost. Some of my clergy groups even went to the extreme of saying that they were treated with disrespect by someone there that really doesn't have any knowledge of the religious world, actually telling some chaplains, you're not really chaplains, because in their mind, the chaplain was an institutional chaplain as approved by the Department of the New York State Council of Churches, and actually that's very disrespectful. Part of the training should be that there's separation of church and state, and none of your personnel has the right to define for us who's a chaplain and who's not a chaplain. That's within the religious realm. As long as they fulfill your protocol, whatever that is, because we do have to submit to the laws of the Department of Corrections. So I'm advocating for the faith volunteer program to be reinstated, if it hasn't been, for someone to be assigned to it, and someone with knowledge of the religious world, not some secular person that doesn't understand that there's Baptists and Methodists and Presbyterians and Pentecostals and holiness and apostolic and imams, and that not one size fits all, and it's not up to them to determine who our religious leaders are. So that's kind of nuanced. I hope you capture what I'm trying to say, that there has to be some internal capacity in the Department of Correction, or else it almost becomes insulting and disrespectful, and power that really the state doesn't have to define who's a religious practitioner and not, as long, again, I give you that power, as they fulfill the protocol that you've established for what religious visitation is. Am I clear? I don't know if I nuanced it correctly. Yes, okay.
Let's see what his comment is to that.
Pass the mic to her.
So, as I said in the beginning, we need help. We need a lot of help. So we're not gonna turn help away. We got staff sitting right here.
Jeff, do you have cards, a bunch of cards?
We'll set up a meeting on that one issue. We'll get a resolution to that pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, Commissioner. My name is Pastor Charlotte Nash Pryor. I'm the senior pastor at Greater Works Deliverance Church and also the president of the Jericho Task Force. I have a question, suggestion. Understanding that A lot of the incarcerated persons on Rikers Island will not be there for a long time, but there are instances where they're there for a longer period of time. They would want them to be 8 months, a year. And looking at access to the island, as we're trying to build relations between the community and the Department of Corrections, has there been any conversation concerning access and putting buses or something within the community, partnering with community stakeholders, where we can get seniors and different family members to the island, because frustration runs high before you get to the island because of the process of getting there. Has there been any conversation surrounding that?
Jeff is part of the committee. I'm not sure if that came up in the work that he's done.
Yeah, just one of the quick things, we obviously walked through some of the recommendations we went through with the advocate groups to talk about kind of public transportation. We talked to the mayor's office of operations, and there's only one bus line that actually travels across. So what we are trying to do is, one, expand that bus line itself, just in terms of frequency, but in terms of taking a look at things from other communities, we want to work with you and figure out, because I'm sure there are limited resources, but we're open to the idea. We just have to figure out exactly how to kind of plan that. So we'll look at that and expanding it beyond the one bus lane.
Okay, here's a question here.
Good morning. First of all, thank y'all for having this forum. My name is Ken Bright, and I'm the founder of a reentry program in Mount Vernon. My question is more involved with the elephant in the room as far as mental health. We understand mental health is a big issue in our society, but specifically in the corrections. My question is with correction officers. Substance abuse as well as steroid use is a very heavy thing in correction officers' lives. My question is, are there anything in place that's going to have to be tested as well as treated? And those who cannot be treated to be removed? Because that's the only way you'll transcend the mindset of individual. And talking about humanity, as the Reverend brought up, bringing humanity back into, or it really wasn't there, but bringing it into the facility where we can reduce the violence. Because violence permeates violence. And that's a big issue in Rikers Island and a lot of jails. So I just wanted to know your response dealing with that as far as treatment as well as testing. I understand there's supposed to be a testing when they first hired, because I can see what you mentioned in there, bringing in qualified people. What is considered qualified? That's it. Thank you.
That's right.
Okay, the qualification standard that we use is very similar to what PD uses, similar types of work. So we really married our background investigation with very similar to the police departments. Officers are subject to random tests. So it's I think every payroll period, there's 100 names randomly selected, and they are tested for illegal substances. That's been an ongoing since probably the mid-90s. It's been an ongoing program.
So, another question here?
Good morning, my name is Samuel Williams, I'm with JCF. I also have a similar question, but it refers to treatment of individuals who are detained and are identified with having mental health problems. I've also worked on Rikers Island as a discharged social worker and recognized the process. I understand that the first line of defense is safety, community. And what I've noticed is that individuals that are returning to the community do not get adequate screening upon their release. Another factor that impinges the process of making sure that these individuals are safe when they leave the island is that it's optional for them to get treatment upon their releases. In some instances, if there are not officers available to go down to the clinical unit, then that individual will not receive any type of services in terms of ensuring that this individual is safe to return to the community. How is this issue being addressed?
And can we take the other question right behind his before the commissioner answers, because this will be his final response before he answers the question.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jose Negron, the Northeast Field Director for Prison Fellowship. One of the issues that we noticed, we have various programs on the island, primarily at GMDC and now moving to other jails. And one of the things that we've noticed is that there are some amazing correction officers, and people here need to know that. There's some really professional, amazing correction officers that just amaze me. The provocation that they take and the way that they endure and handle that is just amazing. However, there's also some correction officers out there that were in the gangs that they are now providing oversight for. And I'm just wondering a little bit about, for the new correction officers that are being brought, is there an awareness of that being taken into account when they're being interviewed and when they're being recruited? So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is that many of the correction officers, on the average, probably work double shifts 3 or 4 times a week. You're exhausted, under a lot of pressure. And so even the really good correction officers, you're working 16 hours. You do that 2 or 3 times a week. It's rough. Is anything being done to try to increase the number of correction officers and alleviate the pressure on that issue?
So on the mental health piece, we really have established a CAPS unit, which is clinical alternative to punitive seg. So if an inmate seriously mentally ill commits an infraction, doesn't go to punitive seg, he goes to a clinical treatment. It's not a lockdown unit. We've also, because those units were very successful, we created what we call PACE units, similar setup to the CAPS units, other than you don't have to commit an infraction to get the level of clinical care. We're in process of standing up 4 units like that. I think they're very impressive. I think they do a very good job on treating the mentally ill, much better than anything, I think, even in the country. So if you haven't seen those, I encourage you to come in, take a look, talk to the staff, talk to the officers and the clinical staff. I think you get a pretty good picture of the work they're doing. And the numbers of officers is critical to our reform. We know we can't ask people to work doubles and triples in some cases and do great work. We had to address that. We've doubled our academy class sizes in the last 2. We'll have run 2 other 600 officer classes this year, which I think will go a long way to alleviating that stress of overtime. It is crazy, the amount of hours that these officers are putting in, and not because they're volunteering, because they're being held, for mandatory additional shifts. That's on the agenda. We understand that that's a big piece for us to successfully move forward. And we more than double the size of these classes, well, for this whole calendar year, we'll run 3 600 officer classes. That'll get us a long ways to doing the things that need to get done on Rikers Island, because you're right. I'm not sure how much attention you're going to pay for working 16 hours, 2 or 3 days a week.
Okay, so right now I'm just gonna do a quick recap, and this is what I want you to do. They said they had an open door policy. Jeff is gonna have his cards. Take advantage of open door policy. That means suggestions, recommendations, sitting at the table, being a part of that task force, doing what you need to do to protect our children as well as the officers, because for us, it's about safety for all. Am I right about that? Okay, so just to reiterate, we're looking at some, talked about training. We're encouraging training. Number 1, we talked about facility upgrade with the building being dilapidated compared to NYPD state of the art building down here in Queens. But the training to be inclusive of trauma training, training for special populations, adolescents and women and people with mental illness. We also want there to be a closer look at the reinstating the faith volunteer programs to be reinstated as long as it fulfills your protocol. And again, just opening up the conversation more on what are we doing about the mental illness issue, what are we doing about the overworked officers. And I really want to encourage you that if you have more to input, take their card and take the time to get involved. Because the only way we're going to see change is if we be the change we want to see. So we actually have to get involved. It's one thing for us to be a talking head and talk about what's wrong. And it's another thing for us to say, he's given us a wide open door to create a partnership and to collaborate on these things, which isn't always the case. And so I really want to encourage you to do just that. We have a long way to go. This meeting does not capture everything, but Commissioner, we do want you to come back so that we can have even a more extensive conversation as we work toward progress to some of these things being implemented. One of the things we're really carrying is decreasing the number of hours it takes for family members to see their loved ones. That has to be there, and being a part of changing the culture of the officers. Can we give them a hand? Thank you so much for coming. And also the policy director, what was his name again? I'm sorry. Peter, and they're gonna see you for communications, etc. So we're gonna transition our second guest